Hello everyone at Local Choice. This is your good friend and partner, Johnny Pieper. I'm here to do a virtual tour, so while I'm out of town, you know exactly what to say and do. This will be a fun tutorial. It shouldn't take long. Let's get started.
Everybody says that the living is easy. I can barely see 'cause my head's in.
All right. Step one in making a spirit. You first have to make beer. Now this is an important point because not a lot of people realize that. Most people think alcohol comes out of thin air, but in fact it is made and distilled from beer. Now in this industry, of course, we call it mash. We don't call it beer, but it's about one and the same. So how do you make this beer? That's a great question you may have asked yourself. Well, you have to have three very important things. First thing is water. Of course, you can't distill a solid. You can only distill liquids. The second thing is you need sugar. Then you need yeast. And yeast eats the sugar and produces CO2 and alcohol. It does this by gravity feeding down the fermenter, of course, eating the sugars, producing alcohol. That is step one. So this is an example of one of our fermenters. It holds a total of 350 gallons. But we only fill it with 300 in our process, and you'll see why later. So there's two different types of mashes that we make. The first one is a molasses mash. Now molasses is used to only make one product in our lineup, and that's rum. So molasses is a very easy product to work with because it is already made of sugar. Molasses is sucrose. So in a fermenter just like this, for every pound of molasses, you add a gallon of water. You mix that together, that gives it the right Brix count. Most people don't care to know what a Brix count is, but just so you know, it is the definition of the sugar level that is in the liquid that is best used for yeast. And yeast loves a Brix count of 18 to 22. So we're shooting for about a 19 with the molasses. So for every pound of molasses, we had a gallon of water. Yeast is an atypical fungus, and it acts like a bacteria. So it likes your body's temperature. That's what bacteria likes. So once we fill a fermenter, we want to make sure that it gets heated to anywhere from 88 to 95 degrees, which is a little short than your body temperature, but right around there. It's perfect for the yeast. You dump yeast at the top, and once again, it gravity feeds down. Eat sugar, making a molasses mash. Now you'll ask yourself, what does this molasses beer taste like? It tastes horrible. That's why nobody commercially makes a molasses beer. That's okay because it makes great, great rum. But that's not the only beer that we make. We also make corn beer. And the corn is used to make our vodka, which is then can make our gin. It's also used to make moonshine that once it's barreled is bourbon. But corn is very different from a molasses mash because corn is not made of sugar. It's made of starch. But luckily for us, if you heat the material, the cornmeal, it will convert to glucose, which is sugar. So step one is to fill a fermenter with water and begin to heat it up. And simultaneously, we use the mill room to auger in milled corn. Remember, this corn comes from our good friends, the Myers, at Myers Farm in Bowman, South Carolina. So we use this mash tun as a heating vessel or a kettle to cook corn. The best information, the best way to explain it is we heat it up to about 185 degrees for about 2 hours, and then we lower the temperature in a crash cool. Once again, back to about to your body's temperature again. Once again, 88 to 95. We use that to fill into a fermenter, drop yeast on it, and once again, it gravity feeds down, eating the converted sugars to produce CO2 and alcohol. And much like the molasses mash, the corn mash is not very delicious. In fact, prime example, once again, no one commercially makes corn beer. It looks unappetizing and it just doesn't taste good. I had one person on a tour say it tastes a lot like Fritos Chardonnay. And I think she was very, very keen on that taste. It tasted like a cooked corn wine. Not that appetizing. But once again, it makes wonderful, wonderful things like bourbon. All right, so now once that we've fermented, we know it's gonna go for about 8 days. And within that 8 days, 8 or less, all the sugar that's going to get converted to alcohol, the yeast is already eaten. The yeast will then die at the bottom of the tank, and we're all ready to go. So what do you do next? We take that 300 gallons of fermentation, and we put it into our 300-gallon still. Now this is a stripping still or a functioning finishing still. Here we use it as a stripping still until we need to start making larger orders. So step one is let's convert or take all of the alcohol that's in the molasses mash and the corn mash and let's pull it out. It is done with a still which acts very much like a crock pot. And when you explain it as a crock pot, people totally understand the goal of this. It's to slowly raise the temperature. This is important because alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water. And so if we slowly raise the temperature of the mash in the kettle, the alcohol will steam out, push itself down the downslope, which is the angled L right here. And once it hits this condenser, which is being filled with circulated cold water, that steam will turn back to a liquid. So once again, alcohol vapor or steam travels up the column, comes down the downslope, and is converted back to a liquid here in the condenser. So it's within these barrels that you're going to collect all the stripped liquor. It's called stripped liquor because you're stripping the beer or mash of all of its alcohol. All the different types of alcohol are categorized into three pieces: your heads, hearts, and tails. Many of your guests will be familiar with these phrases: heads, hearts, and tails. So what is in your head, hearts, and tails? Let me explain it. So your heads contain acetone, that's fingernail polish remover. There's methanol. Methanol is a very poisonous, and when you drink it, it can make you go blind. It's a good thing to tell people, don't drink moonshine from someone's backyard, because if you're drinking methanol, it can kill you. Go ahead and buy my product. Give them a big smile, they'll buy a bottle. Those are your heads. Your hearts are ethanol. Ethanol is what you're drinking when you're drinking booze. And then your tails contain propanol. Propanol is not overly poisonous. It comes in propanols number 2 and number 1, but it'll give you a really nasty hangover. That's why really inexpensive liquors give you a worse hangover, because they go further into the propanol stage in their final run, giving them more alcohol per pound of grain, making it cheaper to produce, but also, of course, making it worse for you. Using prime examples, thing like Taka or Taka vodka, that'll give you a hangover, but Striped Pig vodka, of course, will not. So both of our mashes reach about 10% alcohol by volume. And that's important to explain because if there's 300 gallons of mash and it's 10% alcohol by volume, clearly there's only 30 gallons worth of alcohol. And so we use these 55-gallon drums to collect that and give them a good comparison. Alcohol first starts coming out of the still, it's very high in proof, very low in water. As you cook it, becomes all water, no alcohol. And that's how long it takes. It takes about 8 hours to get to all water, and it takes about 55 gallons worth of liquid. Convenient for us, these are 55-gallon drums. So it takes about an 8-hour process to pull out 55 gallons worth of spirits and liquid water. And when it collects, it's about 40% alcohol by volume, and it's ready to be distilled into a final product. What's left over in the kettle is put into a tote and given to the farmers to be mixed as sweet feed. All right, so this is our finishing still. It's pretty much exactly the same as the 300. This is a 100. It's obviously just a little smaller, but does the same purpose. It's going to separate alcohol from raw water. Once again, remember, this is going to be about 40% alcohol by water in the stripped liquor, and we're going to try to separate the different alcohols from each other, making a final product. So, how do we do this? Once again, alcohols burn at lower temperatures, and the heads, hearts, and tails come out in that order. We don't want to drink the heads or the tails, just the hearts. So what we want to do is to collect them separately by making cuts. Let's talk about cuts. This is where it gets actually a little bit more difficult. So we're talking cuts. This is the act of separating the beginning and the end from the middle. So the beginning will start to come out. We're going to collect it in a bucket. Eventually we're going to make a cut, then separating out the ethanol, making a second cut, separating out the third part. So we have to make 2 cuts. Basically, they're like bookends. We want the middle part to actually keep for a spirit. So once that you understand cuts, now we can explain the actual types of liquor that you can make. So the federal government states that anything that's fermented, distilled to 190 proof or greater, is vodka. It's a neutral spirit that can be proofed down to make the wonderful world of vodka. So we use the 4 different plate systems in this column right here to get our stripped liquor to 190 proof. We make cuts. We are now making a neutral spirit that can be proofed down to vodka. Once we've separated this ethanol away, we also can take this vodka, put it to the still, introduce juniper, orange, and lavender, let it soak for 24 hours, redistill it, and we've got gin. That's right. That is something that most people don't know either, that gin is a flavored vodka. But we also can do more than that. We can also make whiskeys. By changing the plate system, we can make 155 proof corn liquor, which is then considered a whiskey. Moonshine, for the most part, or corn moonshine, is a whiskey. It's just unaged. Once we put that corn whiskey into a barrel, we're making bourbon. We use the same practices of making whiskey to make our rum. So once we take a molasses mash, a molasses strip, we make it in the same practices as the whiskey, and we're now making a white rum, making, of course, the same type cuts by taste. Once that rum is completed, we can put it into a tank, soak clove, allspice, brown sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla, and in about 4 days, we have the wonderful, insanely popular, and ever-loved Striped Pig Spiced Rum. So, once we have a final product, once we've made our vodka or gin, or shine, or whiskey, or rum, or spiced rum, we simply now need to process it in our packaging line. This bottling line is something that people like to look at. It's a really interesting thing. Compared to like almost the people that loved Legos as kids, become engineers and built something like this. It works really well. It puts out about 5,000 bottles a day on average, and people like to kind of generally look at it. Let's get a quick tour of it. Whoa. So the bottles enter here, are cleaned and filled. The caps come in. We can put any kind of packaging or any kind of labeling on it. Shrink wrapped. And then of course the bottles are done. It takes about 3 of us to run and operate the machinery. So it's generally at the end of the tour, I like to do just a big recap. I say you make a really interesting old style of beer. We're gonna strip out all the liquor, refine it down to make the spirits we want with cuts, process that into either gin, an aged whiskey, or a spiced rum. We bottle it in the bottling line, and you're done. The whole process takes about 3.5 weeks, and it's at this time that I invite them back into the air conditioning, which clearly we require at this time of the year, and that all bottles on the shelf are for purchase. Tours for $5, and to thank them once again for joining us at Striped Pig Distillery, a local choice distillery, for a wonderful tour. Guys, I hope this was informative. Have a good time while I'm out of town.
Wanted to sail upon your waters since I was 3 feet tall. You've seen it all.